The charismatic new steward captured everyone's attention as the leading man. By sheer luck, he managed to transform my three manipulative sisters, persuading them to become his devoted followers, dedicating all their assets to him. Meanwhile, I couldn't help but feel envious of the affection he garnered and continuously attempted to undermine him at every opportunity. Ultimately, my three sisters began to harbor a deep resentment towards me. The oldest sister is a stern-faced executive. She blocked all my financial accounts and expelled me from the family business. The second sister, a compassionate physician, covertly altered my prescriptions, subjecting me to relentless and excruciating pain. The youngest sister, a renowned public figure, decided to hide my true identity, allowing her fans to relentlessly harass me online. My life spiraled into tragedy as I was deserted and left for dead. Upon rebirth, I resolved to lead an honest life. However, to my astonishment, my inner thoughts were audible to my sisters. The final memory before my rebirth was in a dilapidated rented apartment. I was confined to a wheelchair, my clothes sullied with grease, while Alexander, impeccably dressed in designer attire he previously couldn't afford, stood surrounded by my three sisters, forming a protective circle around him. He cast a sideways glance at me, a mocking smile on his face, reminiscing about our past friendship. "Why not apologize today? Call me your brother-in-law and I'll welcome you back into the family business." "What do you say?" he proposed. "Call him brother-in-law? He doesn't deserve that," I retorted. He was the one who had ruined my appearance, leaving me disabled. His brazen entry into our family was merely a tactic to dismantle it from within. Regrettably, no one believed my accusations. Everyone assumed I was merely envious of Alexander and that my misfortunes were self-inflicted. Clenching my jaw, I spat at him. "You expect me to call you brother-in-law? I'd rather perish. One day, your true, ugly nature will be revealed." Before I could finish, he struck my face with such force that I felt my teeth loosen, the ringing in my ears overwhelming. Struggling to open my eyes, I saw my eldest sister's icy gaze. Her forehead was creased, and she looked at me with utter disgust. "Jack, if you can't control your tongue, I have no problem silencing you." I covered my face, teeth clenched. "Sister," she continued, "stop addressing me as such. Since you framed Alexander, you no longer belong to our family." Her words felt like sharp daggers, deeply wounding my already aching heart. The light in my eyes dimmed. I wanted to speak, but my throat was parched, rendering me silent. My heart pounded painfully. I pressed my hand against my chest, struggling to breathe. Medication. Medication. My second sister, who rarely smoked, had resumed the habit because of Alexander. She moved closer, pressing her still glowing cigarette butt against my hand, ignoring my silent cries of agony. Mockingly, she pointed to my chest. "Jack, your congenital heart disease might be because your heart is too dark. I don't think it's worth treating anymore." The pain caused me to fall from my wheelchair. Nearly suffocating, my youngest sister crouched down slowly, observing my emaciated state. Her brow furrowed. "What? Are you playing the victim now? Jack, do you really believe that feigning pity will earn our forgiveness? You're overthinking, and it seems you haven't learned your lesson either." Her words were laden with meaning. I understood her implication, as I had once insulted Alexander. She had allowed his fans to relentlessly abuse me. Some even trailed me, pushing me from my wheelchair and watching me crawl. They frequently threw dead animals at my doorstep, and the landlord, unable to endure it, evicted me. Forced to rent a rundown shack near a garbage dump, with a door that couldn't even be locked, life became unbearable without my medication. Breathing was agonizing, and I felt like a dying fish, collapsing with wounds all over. My vision blurred as I tried to recall any happy memories, but none surfaced. My sisters ignored my pleas, turning away and muttering curses. How unlucky. I tried to speak but lacked the strength to continue. This was my second life, reborn. No matter how meticulously I planned or how hard I tried, I couldn't escape the shadow of the chosen male lead. This world was a tale of fortunate coy, with Alexander as the protagonist, working to dismantle the family business to pave the way for the woman he loved. My three sisters were the antagonists, but they fell for Alexander instantly, were redeemed by him, abandoned everything, and willingly became his subordinates, offering him all their resources. In the end, to save their own lives, each sister became disabled, blind, or incapacitated, ready to sacrifice themselves for Alexander to alter their destinies. I desperately attempted to reveal Alexander's true motives, but in their eyes, I was merely the jealous sibling he had displaced. I transitioned from being the beloved eldest son of the family business to a despised invalid, shunned by everyone. Regardless of how many times I was reborn, Alexander always moved between my three sisters, effortlessly replacing me in their affections. I knew that upon reopening my eyes, everything would reset. But this time, I was exhausted. When I awoke, I felt disoriented. The decrepit, filthy shack had transformed into a bright and welcoming living room. Warm yellow lights highlighted the meticulously arranged food before me. A familiar voice, tinged with slight resentment, spoke from beside me. "Jack, why aren't you eating? Did I not prepare something to your liking?" "I'm sorry. I didn't realize you didn't enjoy this. Whatever you crave, I'll make it for you." My pupils constricted. It was Alexander's voice. By now, we had become friends, and he had saved my three sisters multiple times. His reputation as the family's lucky charm had started to spread, often bringing prosperity to the business. He was no longer in servant attire, but wore the designer clothes I had given him, looking even more like the family heir than I did. His face was marked with grievance, biting his lip as if he struggled to express his true feelings. I specifically asked the housekeeper. "She said you love seafood, so if you're not eating it, is it because of my cooking?" "Don't worry." Following the housekeeper's instructions meticulously, the act intensified, yet I remained silent. Alexander grew increasingly anxious. "Jack, why aren't you talking to me? Are you disgusted because I came from humble beginnings? Do you think I'm dirty?" I attempted to speak, but only incoherent sounds emerged. In this new life, I had developed aphasia and couldn't escape my past's shadows. I pressed my hand to my throat, trying to force words, fearing that upsetting Alexander would give my sisters an excuse to torment me further. Yet, I couldn't form a complete sentence. The eldest sister's gaze shifted between me and Alexander. After a moment, her expression darkened. "Jack, is this how a family member behaves? Whether you want to eat it or not, you should at least finish it." It's Alexander's sincere gesture. I lowered my eyes, inwardly sneering. These three were entirely fixated on Alexander. I thought to myself, how could I possibly refuse? Besides, you'll soon become another master of the family business. What right do I, a disabled outcast living in the slums, have to reject you? Everyone would believe Alexander was your true brother, given how much you defend him. Oh wait, not a real brother, but a lover's brother who still remembers my seafood allergy. My life holds no value now. Suddenly, the room fell silent. The three women, who had been smiling moments ago, grew cold and stopped talking. The nauseating seafood was forced down bite by bite. Suppressing my urge to vomit, I forced a smile at Alexander. The eldest sister, previously scowling as if something inside her had been pricked, watched me finish the seafood quickly. Seeing my pale face, she was about to leave, but quickly reached out. "Jack!" The second sister shot her a glare, signaling her to stop. She turned to me with a gentle expression. "Jack, are you feeling unwell today? Let me check." "Okay." She was a doctor, and had been the one who prescribed the heart medication I took in my previous life, as well as the one who discontinued it. Now, she watched me suffer in pain, having long forgotten that I was once her beloved brother. I stood at the top of the stairs, looking back with my expression hidden in the shadows, unseen by anyone. I thought to myself, it's just an allergy. It won't kill me. I'm really tired. Just stop torturing me. Whatever you want, I'll agree to it. The second sister was stunned, her face paling as she apologized. "I didn't mean to forget about your seafood allergy. I didn't mean to forget. The excuse was both clumsy and laughable. I couldn't maintain the facade any longer. Without a second glance, I turned and left without hesitation. As soon as Alexander appeared, I realized that no matter what I did, I would never be the favored one. So I gave up. Suddenly, there was a knock at the door, pulling me from my chaotic thoughts. It was Alexander again. His usual pitiful tone, his voice cracking with a hint of tears. He knocked repeatedly, as if he wouldn't stop until I opened it. "Jack, what's wrong? Did I upset you?" "I'm sorry, please don't ignore me, okay? Aren't we best friends?" His words were full of grievance, but I heard another voice in my ear. It was still Alexander's voice, but the words he spoke were entirely different. "System, what's wrong with Jack? These recent actions weren't part of the plot either, and now those female characters think I'm bullying him. They've deducted a full 10 points of favorability from me." Then, another mechanical voice followed. "Please rest assured. Host, I've investigated. Their favorability towards you is still above 50. The decrease in favorability is still within a controllable range." System. I felt as if I'd fallen into an ice cave, the cold creeping up my spine despite being in a warm room. I couldn't help but shiver. These voices reminded me of my previous life when Alexander had set me up, causing the car accident that left me briefly unconscious. I had often heard him communicating with this mechanical voice in my ear, discussing plans to ruin the family business and use it as a stepping stone for himself. After regaining consciousness, I immediately sought out my eldest sister, intending to inform her of what had happened. However, no matter what I said, I only received a cold, disdainful look from her. Alexander emerged from my sister's study lounge looking every bit the charming boy-next-door type. "Sandra," he addressed my eldest sister. "Jack must have just been feeling down, which is why he did these foolish things. It's okay, I forgive him." My eldest sister's face darkened as Alexander played the role of the wronged man. She whispered sharply, "Jack, what has happened to you? You tried to stage the car accident to frame Alexander, and now you're trying to slander him in front of me. How could you still care for him and look after him when you were unconscious?" I told him not to blame you. The details are a blur in my memory, but I recall that from that moment on, I was genuinely rejected by the family business. My small suitcase contained only a few simple clothes, and it was pouring rain outside. Yet my sister remained unmoved, her expression cold as she shoved me out. She looked down at me, filthy and covered in mud. "Jack, since you can't accept Alexander, the family business will no longer recognize you as the heir. Without that status, what do you think you are now?" Reflecting on these moments, my body trembled. What is he going to do now? I didn't need to guess. I already knew there was more than just Alexander outside the door. I don't know who he's trying to gain favor with this time. Whatever. It doesn't matter anymore. I'm leaving the family business anyway. I knew there was no avoiding it. Taking a deep breath, I walked over and opened the door. Alexander's hand froze midair as he knocked, but he showed no embarrassment. He reached out, trying to take my hand, but I stepped aside to avoid him. "Jack." He dragged out my name, his gaze frequently drifting towards the youngest sister standing behind him. "Is something wrong? Why are you ignoring me? Please, talk to me." "Okay." In my previous life, Alexander only acted kind in front of my three sisters, especially when they were present. He had likely been acting for their benefit again. The youngest sister remained silent for a long time before finally speaking, defending Alexander. She looked at me, her eyes filled with concealed concern. "Jack, I've heard from our eldest and second sister these past few days. Is there some misunderstanding between you and Alexander? Weren't you two very close before? You don't know how many times he's cried because you've been ignoring him recently." She sighed, her expression showing pure concern for me. "I know a very good psychologist. If you don't want to talk to our eldest or second sister, you can talk to me. I'll take you to see him tomorrow." "Okay." What kind of nonsense is this? I thought to myself. Trying to send me to a psychologist without understanding anything. Of course, in your eyes, if someone doesn't like Alexander, they must have psychological issues. When you allowed your fans to harass me online, where was your concern for my mental health? Are you trying to get revenge for Alexander and lock me up in a psychiatric hospital? The youngest sister froze, her expression gradually twisting. She glanced at Alexander, then at me, and finally, in disbelief, lowered her gaze to her own hands. Jack, she hesitated before speaking. Did I do something wrong? Please don't hate me. My face was full of suspicion. I shook my head and quickly slammed the door shut. After the door closed, I heard a thud, followed by Alexander's pained cry, "Jessica!" The system screamed, warning. Female character Jessica's favorability -10. Her favorability has now dropped below 50. Please, host, find a way to raise her favorability back up. Stop calling me that. The youngest sister's voice sounded a bit harsh. The other two fools were deceived by you, but I haven't. You'd better give me an explanation, or I won't hesitate to— I couldn't hear the rest of her words, but I assumed they had walked away by now. I didn't understand the youngest sister's sudden change of heart and didn't want to either. Seeing how she was defending Alexander now, it was only a matter of time before she followed the same path as in my previous life. Whatever Alexander planned for the family business had nothing to do with me anymore. For me, nothing was more important than simply surviving. I hardly ever returned to the family business anymore, and as a result, Alexander seldom visited either. The family was already concerned about me causing trouble, so they had concealed my identity. The outside world only knew that the family had a young master who had been pampered since childhood but was in poor health, unaware of his true identity. Now, Alexander had almost fully assumed that title. He didn't bother correcting anyone when people inquired, simply smiling and remaining silent. To others, it seemed like he was silently admitting that he was the true heir of the family business. My roommate Daniel looked at me mockingly. Jack, why aren't you hanging out with Alexander lately? Wasn't it just at the start of the semester that you two were always taking the family's car to school together? What happened? You and Alexander had a fallout, and now he won't even let you ride in the family car. I glanced at him, lowered my head, and continued organizing my assignments, ignoring him. But he seemed to have hit a nerve and slammed his phone down, which crashed after his game character died. With a sharp tone, he continued, Alexander doesn't even care about you anymore. You couldn't climb into the family circle, so what's the point of pretending? Alexander, who was sitting beside him, looked a bit uncomfortable. He tugged at Daniel's sleeve and quietly said, Daniel, it's fine. Isn't it already well known that Jack doesn't like me? I can't force anything. Daniel crossed his arms, sneering. I just can't stand him acting all high and mighty. Wasn't he desperate to get close to you before? Now he's pretending to be some big shot. He lowered his eyes, seeming lost in thought for a moment. Then, after a brief pause, he glared at me and snarled, Let's see how long you can keep up this act. After they both made their threats, they left, closing the dorm door. Alexander glanced back at me, his eyes full of calculation. I heard him ask the system again. System, who has the highest favorability now? The system replied, Currently, Sandra has the highest favorability. You need to act quickly. 60 favorability is still too low. You must raise it to 80 within a week, or you won't be able to foresee the next part of the plot. I remembered it was when the eldest sister went to sign a contract and got stranded at sea. Alexander saved her, and that was when they started developing feelings for each other. Whatever, what does that have to do with me? I packed my things, planning to go to the library. But along the way, I started receiving different looks. Some people were pointing at me. Isn't that him? The one they were talking about on the forum? Yeah, Jack. The one who's willing to do anything to climb into a rich family. I heard he and Alexander fell out because he failed to get close to the family sisters. Ugh, he's so disgusting. He used to be so close to Alexander. No wonder he doesn't even talk when he sees him now. If your friend was trying to seduce your sister, would you still talk to him? True, Jack really has no shame. He could have been a decent person, but instead, he chose to be a kept man. I lowered my head, wanting to ignore the words, but just as I was about to leave, a clear voice interrupted my movement. Alexander, for some unknown reason, appeared near the library. He walked over and grabbed my hand tightly, not letting me leave. "Jack, don't listen to what they're saying. It's all a misunderstanding. They don't believe you, but I do." His words were comforting, but they were merely expressions of his subjective feelings. He never offered any real proof that I was innocent. To outsiders, he looked kind, but no one would actually believe I hadn't done what they accused me of. A perfect case of the thief calling out, "Catch the thief." My silence seemed to confirm the accusations, and the insults from onlookers only grew louder. Alexander looked even more aggrieved and helpless than I did. His eyes filled with tears as he gazed at me. "Here we go again? Is crying all Alexander has left as a tactic?" I lowered my eyes, wanting to distance myself from him, but his grip on my hand was unshakable. Suddenly, the system issued a loud warning. "Warning, the female antagonist Jessica is approaching. Please be mindful of your image and avoid any actions that could lower favorability." Alexander's expression changed, and with a trembling voice, he began speaking louder in my defense. "Stop saying things about Jack. He's not like that. You've all misunderstood him. With that performance, anyone would think we were the best of friends. I've seduced your sisters, and yet you're still speaking up for me. Truly, how kind-hearted you are." I let out a quiet, bitter laugh, my gaze lingering on my swollen wrist, realizing it was sore. A voice from outside the crowd interrupted my thoughts. "What do you mean, not like that?" Even though she was wearing a hat and sunglasses, Jessica couldn't hide her commanding presence. Soon, her passionate fans recognized her, and shrieks of excitement erupted. "Isn't that Jessica?" "Definitely. Looks like she's here to back Alexander up. After all, her little brother's been hoodwinked by Jack, and he's still determined to be friends with him." "Aw, sister, you're so pretty. If I'd known, I would have talked to Alexander more. Maybe he would have helped me get your autograph." The noise around me was deafening, but I felt completely detached, as though I were watching from a distance. I thought to myself, when will this farce end? Isn't Jessica supposed to be here to back Alexander up? Why is she still hesitating? Shouldn't she just come over and push me down, calling me names like before? Jessica furrowed her brow, and amid the astonished and gossip-filled looks, she walked directly toward Alexander, then handed the cake she was holding to me, standing behind him. Her voice was full of affection as she spoke. "Jack, I know I've been busy with promotions lately and haven't had time to see you. How are you managing living at school? Would you like to move into the apartment I have nearby? By the way, I brought you a strawberry cake. I didn't have time to get your favorite brand today, but next time I will." "Okay." The crowd fell silent. Even Alexander's face darkened. I pursed my lips, unwilling to take the cake from her. What's she up to now? I get it. She wants to repeat her old trick and make everyone at school think we have a close relationship. So they'll bully me. Jessica, you really never get tired of using the same methods. Do you? With her fans in the mix this time, I might end up being doused in acid just like in the past. The thought of that searing pain and constant, invasive humiliation made me shudder. Sure enough, as long as I was tied to Alexander, nothing good would come of it. Jessica's expression turned dark, and she snapped, "What are you all talking about? What do you mean Jack seducing me? The family business has only ever had one young master, and that's Jack. Alexander is just a servant in our house. How did he become the heir of the family business?" The system's notifications echoed with a drop in Jessica's favorability. Jessica's favorability decreased by 10. Current favorability 40. Alexander's expression shifted to panic. He had originally assumed that, given Jessica's pity for him, she wouldn't reveal that he was a servant in the family business. But now, everyone who had just insulted me was casting venomous glares at him. His face turned pale, and tears streamed down his face as he cried out, "What's wrong with being a servant? At least I'm earning money on my own. Unlike you people who were born with silver spoons in your mouths, anything you want is handed to you. But even so, you have no right to trample on my dignity. My family might not be as wealthy as yours, but that doesn't make me any less than you. His speech stunned everyone present, and even Jessica was left speechless with guilt, seeing that his plan was backfiring. Alexander hastily stopped and ran off, tears still streaming down his face. The system chimed in at the right moment. Congratulations, host. Jessica's favorability increased by 20. Current favorability, 50. Now that people knew I was the true heir of the family business, their attitudes toward me were noticeably different. Daniel even posted an apology on the anonymous forum thread where he had slandered me. I was misled by Alexander's lies and posted that thread. All the vague evidence came from Alexander. He used me as a pawn. I hope Jack can be the bigger person and forgive me. I sincerely apologize to you, Jack. As a result, more people began criticizing Alexander. They called him vain, unscrupulous, and manipulative. Someone who, despite claiming to be self-reliant, would throw a fit when his status was questioned. They pointed out that if he truly didn't care about status, why didn't he clarify things when people mistook him for the heir of the family business? Too bad I didn't pay much attention to the forums. The only thing I knew was that my eldest sister called me, her voice cold as she ordered me to come home. It was obvious she was calling me to defend Alexander. I delayed until dusk before finally knocking on the family's door. Alexander sat in the center, crying as usual, immediately reminding me of the last image I saw before I died in my previous life. Here we go again. Jessica seemed the most conflicted. She hesitated before walking toward me, but ultimately stood by Alexander's side. Jack, you went too far with this, I thought to myself. Too far. I don't even know what I've done. It's Alexander who hasn't clarified his own identity and has been inciting others to slander me. Have I ever said anything bad about him or defended myself? Maybe they all think I'm trying to frame Alexander, but no one's ever cared about how I've been unable to speak due to the events of my past life. Seeing their posture, almost begging for forgiveness, I stopped at the door and didn't step any closer. The family business had long since lost its place for me. Jessica's expression shifted, as if she had finally understood something. She hurried toward me. Jack, you. Suddenly, Alexander's system beeped urgently. Warning, Jessica's favorability decreased by 10. Current favorability, 40. Warning, Jessica's favorability decreased by 10. Current favorability, 30. Warning, Laura's favorability decreased by 10. Current favorability, 40. Favorability toward Jessica and Laura is plummeting. But only my eldest sister gave me a long, deep look before showing no reaction. Alexander, seeing this, rushed to grab my eldest sister's hand, crying profusely. Sandra, you know I'm not like that. What I care about in the family business has never been money. It's all of you. You're like my real family, making me feel the warmth of a family. Maybe it's my existence that threatened Jack, which is why he... Before he could finish, he was cut off by my second sister's cold voice. What do you mean? Maybe you're saying you're not here for the money, but who would believe that when Jack sent you those limited edition clothes and sports cars? Why didn't you reject them with dignity like Jessica said? Jessica may have played the role well, but her brain works slowly. It wasn't until my second sister pointed out the flaws in Alexander's words that she realized, her face filling with rage. Yeah, if you didn't care, why did you keep insisting on riding in the family's car with Jack to school? Why didn't you explain when people mistook you for the family's young master? You clearly care more than anyone. In no time, both of their favorability ratings were nearly gone. Alexander's face turned ashen, and he could only cling desperately to my eldest sister. With a gentle gaze, she softly ran her fingers through his hair. Alexander, don't be afraid. As long as you haven't done anything wrong, I will stand by you, so please don't disappoint me. Alexander leaned affectionately against her side. Then, in a corner where no one could see, he shot me a provocative glance. Even though my second and youngest sister's favorability had dropped, the real power in the family business lay with my eldest sister. As long as he won her over, what did he have to worry about? He had already decided his position as the future head of the family business. In his mind, he was frantically calling out to the system. System, since Laura and Jessica's favorability is already gone, I'll use their remaining favorability to unlock the next plot point related to Sandra. The system hesitated. Host, are you sure about this? Once the favorability reaches negative numbers, it will completely shift to hatred, and these female antagonists will utterly despise you. Alexander dismissed it. They're just two female antagonists. How much trouble could they really cause me? Hurry up and exchange it. The system complied. Ding, plot point unlocked. Sandra will be trapped at sea while signing a contract in half a month. The host can prepare in advance and offer assistance, ensuring that Sandra will be completely under your control. A confident smile spread across Alexander's face. I could see his intentions clearly and let out a cold laugh. Well, I wish you good luck with your rescue plan. With the system's help, Sandra will likely fall for you. After all, saving her life would be a huge favor. You'll probably use that as leverage to demand marriage. She might even agree. Then you'll marry her while secretly seducing my second and youngest sisters. The family business will truly be blessed beyond measure. Good luck to you all. A nest of snakes and rats, never to be separated. I only hope to be left alone soon. I don't want to be a pawn in your twisted game. My eldest sister gave me a heavy, complicated look. That gaze was too ambiguous for me to understand. But I boldly guessed that she, like in my past life, wanted me to leave, though she couldn't bring herself to say it. So I packed my things and left the family business. I took everything that belonged to me, even having a new bank card issued to deposit my money. This time, I didn't end up like in my previous life, having to rent a dilapidated apartment. My second and youngest sisters visited me frequently, though I wasn't sure whether it was out of guilt or pretense. The sympathy in their eyes was unmistakable. My second sister always made time to talk to me, as though speaking to a child. But when she saw that I was unresponsive, she would leave with a look of disappointment. My youngest sister had suggested multiple times that I should see a doctor, but I always refused, shaking my head. Half a month after leaving the family business, I received an invitation to an art exhibition at sea, hosted by my favorite artist. Without giving it much thought, I packed my things and accepted the invitation. Upon arrival, however, the space allocated for the art exhibition was disappointingly small, and most of the cruise ship was dedicated to leisure activities for the rich and powerful. There, I saw my eldest sister, and, beside her in a suit, standing elegantly and confidently, was Alexander. He seemed to have anticipated my arrival, a mocking smile curling at the corners of his lips. He whispered to the system, "Since this plot point involves a death, why can't it be Jack who dies? If he hadn't been born into the family business, who would he even be? He's better off being a stepping stone for me. At least he'll die with a purpose." My eldest sister clearly saw me, frowning as if she had a bad premonition. She turned to look at Alexander, seemingly asking him something. But by the time she turned back, I had already disappeared into the crowd. Alexander's venomous voice, like a festering wound, echoed in my ear. "Jack, you just wait. Let's see who has the last laugh." I sighed, wanting to curse him, but I didn't know where to begin. I knew his intentions were impure, but I hadn't expected his plan to be so bold. He even managed to knock me unconscious and carry me away while I was standing in the crowd at the exhibition. When I woke up, I found myself dangling outside the ship like bait, barely 2 or 3 meters above the dark, raging sea. Beside me, Alexander was in the same predicament. When he saw I was awake, he hurriedly squeezed out a couple of crocodile tears, crying out, "Sandra, Jack's awake. You have to save him. My life isn't worth anything." The man in the suit standing beside him spoke with a deep voice. "So, Sandra, have you made up your mind? One is your biological brother, the other your lover's brother. Who will you choose to save? Bye now." I understood exactly what Alexander was up to. He just wanted to use my eldest sister's choice to strike at my heart. Unfortunately for him, he miscalculated. The moment I died a tragic death in my past life, I had already abandoned all family ties. It wasn't worth it. I didn't care about my eldest sister's decision. All I cared about was whether I could survive. My eldest sister raised her hand, hesitated for a moment, then slowly pointed at Alexander, her voice heavy. "You, Let go of Alexander. He's innocent. Upon hearing this, the men in the suit burst out laughing. Well, well, Sandra, I didn't expect you to fall this low, sacrificing your own family to save your lover's family. I guess I didn't misjudge you. He waved his hand. Someone pretended to untie Alexander, but in reality, they quickly cut the rope holding me. The other rope was also on the verge of snapping. The man in the suit gave a dark look. You think I don't see through your real intentions? You're just afraid I'll hurt your brother. So you pretended to care about Alexander. I was speechless. Could it be that this is her true feeling? Maybe she doesn't care about my life as much as she's just unwilling to take a risk, afraid to put Alexander in danger. Anyway, both of them will escape in the end, sitting on a lifeboat kissing each other, rather than using me as a harmless threat. You should just cut Alexander down now. Sandra might even cry out of sympathy. My eldest sister's expression changed several times, and in the end, she chose to compromise. You want the South City tender, right? I'll withdraw from the competition if you let him go. Alexander instinctively thought she was talking about him and tearfully said, Sandra, sister. The man in the suit waved his hand dismissively. Sandra, do you really think you still have the leverage to negotiate with me? The South City land alone isn't enough. I also want the cooperation between the Bai and Chi families. This cooperation I knew was the secret deal Alexander had betrayed later. Why is this man asking for so much now? The plot had shifted in ways I didn't expect. Alexander didn't anticipate this man demanding so much. This wasn't what he had discussed at all. His plan had been to use the family business as a stepping stone to enter higher circles, not to cripple it today. He cleared his throat, trying to remind the men in suits, but the rope holding him was suddenly cut. The men glanced at him coldly. Why are you coughing? Didn't you tell me this information? What? You don't want me to talk about it now? Alexander was completely stunned. He instinctively panicked, forgetting he was still suspended, and hastily tried to explain. What are you talking about? What did I say? He desperately tried to communicate with his eyes, but had long forgotten that making a deal with a tiger meant he, too, must have enough support. Otherwise, he'd just be a tasty snack. The so-called cooperation and contracts, to those in high positions like him, were mere tools to be used. How could they care about someone like Alexander? It was just too unfortunate that Alexander, relying on his system to predict the plot, naively believed everything would go according to plan. A sudden gust of wind rocked the cruise ship, and the already precarious rope snapped. Alexander screamed in fright. Sandra, save me! And then he watched as my eldest sister ran towards me, throwing herself into the water. Not only he, but even I widened my eyes in disbelief. My eldest sister held me tightly, using her body as a cushion, diving into the sea before me. She struggled to hold on to me, trying to find something to cling to while swallowing a few large mouthfuls of salty seawater. She attempted to comfort me. Jack, don't be afraid. Sister's here. I was stunned for a moment, unsure of what act she was putting on, but only dared to curse silently in my heart. What's with the act? Shouldn't you be yelling for Alexander now? Her expression stiffened, but fortunately, the rescue team I had arranged earlier arrived quickly. Even so, when I was pulled onto the lifeboat, shivering from the cold, she threw a thick coat over me, then turned her gaze towards the struggling figures in the distance. Alexander wasn't lucky. As soon as he hit the water, a large wave tossed him several dozen meters away. By the time he was rescued, he was barely breathing. Once we reached the shore, the men in suits, who had never intended for anyone to die, cursed loudly as the police surrounded him. Who? Who called the police? I glanced at him and snorted softly, thinking, who else could it be? Of course it's me. I knew Alexander wasn't keeping his plans hidden. How could I not prepare in advance? I'd overheard Alexander's conversation with the system. Even if I didn't know the full plan, I could guess enough. So, before getting on the ship, I'd already contacted the rescue team and the police. I ensured that every bad actor would be caught. My eldest sister looked at me for some reason, as if she wanted to laugh. Her lips twitched, but she said nothing. She stared at the unconscious Alexander, her expression unreadable, before ordering her men who had arrived in a hurry. "Get him treated, don't let him die." She paused for a moment before adding, "But don't let him live too well." Of course, Alexander didn't die, but his body was weak, and after being soaked in icy seawater for so long, he developed an irreversible condition. What he and the men in suits had planned could be described as kidnapping and extortion, but on a larger scale, it was intentional harm. With the family business stepping in, none of them managed to escape, and they were each sentenced to 5 years in prison. My eldest sister also took me to visit Alexander. I wasn't sure of her intentions, so I obediently followed her. Through a thick glass window, Alexander looked emaciated, yet he still firmly believed that my eldest sister had come to rescue him. "Sandra, why are you only here now to save me?" "It's too late. Alexander is in so much pain." His eyes were filled with tears. "Sandra, it was Jack who incited me. It was all his scheme. He seemed to believe that my eldest sister would trust him and that I wouldn't defend myself, so he quickly threw the blame onto me." My eldest sister looked at him and sneered. By now, playing innocent is pointless. Alexander's face turned pale. In his mind, he was desperately cursing the system. System, wasn't Sandra's favorability 80? Why is she treating me like this? According to the system, she should be madly in love with me by now. The system's voice nearly turned into static as the damage to the host affected its operations. System repair. Repair failed. Sandra's current favorability 80. 70. 60. Minus 80. Charles, what? Me. What? What's going on? How did Sandra's favorability drop so suddenly? It shouldn't be like this. A drop from 80 to minus 80 is ridiculous. Could it really be that Alexander's system is malfunctioning? Alexander was shocked, crying and shouting, still refusing to believe the system's data, and screamed for my eldest sister. After all, she was the only one who could still pull him out of this mess. But my eldest sister ignored his cries and said coldly, "Looks like your so-called system isn't omnipotent after all. Can't even see through a disguise." Alexander and I exchanged surprised glances, both of us thinking the same thing. How did she know? I knew Alexander had a system because he was reborn, and I could hear his thoughts. But how did my eldest sister know? The person who caused the surprise didn't seem inclined to answer. She simply looked at Alexander with cold eyes. "Don't you want to get out?" "Well, Laura's team has recently collaborated with the National Laboratory on a project studying the human brain. I'm sure a person with a system, like you, would be perfect for their research." No matter how much Alexander struggled, crying that he wanted to stay in prison, it was all in vain. He was fitted with a helmet-like device, wrapped up like a mummy, and sent straight to the laboratory. I was once again forced to move back to the family business. After the 3 sisters parted ways with Alexander, it was as if they had suddenly awakened, each scrambling to be kinder to me. But I could never again feel a sense of belonging in this family. My second sister was very busy with laboratory work. Whenever she came home, she would bring news about Alexander. "We thought the system was just an intangible concept, but we actually found it in him," she said mysteriously. "Guess where the system is?" the youngest sister eagerly asked, tapping her head. "It's in his brain. When we first scanned it, we thought that shadow in his brain was some illness, but now we know it's actually a mass of data that we can't decode with our current technology. Once we crack it, creating any system won't be a problem." As for Alexander, according to my second sister, he was now a useless person. His body couldn't withstand the intensity of the experiments and had decayed to the point where the laboratory abandoned him completely. After all, the system was in his brain. As long as his brain remains active, that's all that matters. My eldest sister later had several conversations with me. She revealed that it wasn't until I moved back to school that she remembered what had happened before. It turned out she, too, had been reborn. She learned about Alexander's system from my thoughts and, fearing I might use some other means against her, decided to turn the tables and capture both Alexander and his system in one fell swoop. In the end, she looked at me, holding my suitcase, and asked in a hoarse voice, "Jack, are you really going abroad?" I stopped right before the security checkpoint and nodded at her seriously. Whether or not Alexander had been punished or the three sisters had finally realized their mistakes, the pain I had endured couldn't be erased. I couldn't ignore it, nor did I want to force myself to pretend nothing had happened and continue living as the carefree young master of the family business. Instead, I preferred to go abroad to study and pursue my dream of becoming a painter. As for their punishment, perhaps waking up from Alexander's deception and realizing what they had done to me was punishment enough for them. After all, their brother, the family's eldest young master, had already died by their own hands. I have to leave. When I spoke, my eldest sister froze. From the moment I realized that my words weren't meant for defense or to be heard by anyone else, my muteness gradually healed. But I had never spoken to them before. This was the first sentence. I walked past the security checkpoint, facing the clear blue sky and the bright, beautiful future ahead. I didn't look back. The moment I decided to leave, I completely abandoned them. Goodbye. I will no longer be your brother. I am my own person.